If any of you come to me without hating your mother and father, your loved ones, your sisters and brothers, you can't be my disciples. Well, if that's the case, then we've definitely got a nation full of Christian disciples. Our country has become so polarized over abortion, race, immigration, and LGBT rights that more and more families are splitting down the seams. Children and parents can no longer have civil discussions with each other over climate change. Siblings can no longer talk to each other about political affiliations. Conversations disintegrate into either shouting matches or stony silence. And any feelings that once bound us together have now been shattered, leaving in their place attitudes that border on hatred. But does anyone really believe that was what Jesus was advocating? Was he really encouraging hatred as a requirement for discipleship? This same person who would have been taught from early childhood to honor your father and your mother so that your days may be long in the land that your sovereign God is giving you. And when asked what is the greatest commandment, he would offer two, the second one being, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Did the same Jesus who spoke these words really expect the crowds to hate their family if they had any intention of becoming one of his disciples? It's doubtful. What's more likely is he was using a figure of speech called hyperbole. Hyperbole is an exaggeration that's meant to create a strong impression. This bag weighs a ton. The shopping cost me $1 million. I'm so hungry I could eat a horse. If any of you come to me without hating your mother and father, your loved ones, your sisters and brothers, you can't be my disciples. So if Jesus isn't advocating for literal hatred, then what's his point in this morning's text? Well, to understand that, I think we have to understand the importance of family in relationships in first century Palestine. Jewish identity was intimately tied up with families. The family unit was and still is the primary source for identity formation. For instance, when Jesus addressed Simon Peter as Simon Bar-Jonah, that translates into Simon, son of Jonah. When Jesus healed a blind man named Bartimaeus, that would have translated as son of Timaeus. One's identity was so enmeshed in their family that one's own name included the name of the Father. And so when Jesus said that discipleship meant hating one's family, he was saying discipleship meant letting go of one's identity, abandoning how one perceives themselves to be, relinquishing the ego. If we understand it this way, then the rest of the text makes better sense. For instance, Jesus says not only to hate one's family members, but to also hate one's own self. If any of you come to me without hating your mother and father, your loved ones, your sisters and brothers, indeed, your very self, you can't be my follower. Hating one's very self would be a hyperbolic way of saying letting go of one's ego. Jesus follows this up with the words, anyone who doesn't take up the cross and follow me can't be my disciple. I've heard many explanations over the years about what it means to take up the cross. Some people think of the cross as a burden they carry all their lives, such as a strained relationship, a thankless job, or a physical illness. But the cross was an instrument of death. And so to take up the cross meant you embraced that which would put you to death. I think that maybe Jesus was telling the crowds that discipleship entails embracing that which puts to death our sense of self, our ego. After offering up a couple of brief parables to the crowds to explain that discipleship was costly and one shouldn't go into it without expecting to pay a high price, he concludes with the words, "You can't be my disciple if you don't give up all of your possessions." Now, at first glance, this would make for a great stewardship sermon. And no doubt it has indeed been misused by preachers to convince people to make the ultimate sacrifice of giving up all their possessions for the sake of the pastor's salary and the church's ministry programs. But what is more dear to you? What is more of a priceless possession than your own ego? When Jesus said, "You can't be my disciple if you don't give up all of your possessions," might he once again have been insisting that the high cost of discipleship meant letting go of one's sense of self and all the trappings that are associated with it? Letting go of the pride in that college diploma that entitles you to certain privileges. Letting go of the obsession over that income bracket that protects you from financial insecurity. Letting go of the attachment you have to that fabulous wardrobe and beautiful face of yours that causes people to sit up and take notice. Letting go of the need for that romantic relationship that is more important to you than anything else in the world, maybe even more important than your relationship with God, the very source of your being. It's a costly thing that Jesus is asking, no demanding, when he calls us to be his disciples. And I'll be the first one to admit that there are days I am unwilling to follow Jesus if it means giving up that sense of self that is wrapped up in so many of these things that I've always wanted in my life. But the point that I believe Jesus was trying to make when he looked around and saw so many people who were following him was that discipleship was a costly thing. Most of them had no idea of the high cost that would be expected from them if they identified as his disciples. And I think maybe that might still be the case. But here's the thing. Committing oneself to following the way of Christ is not a one-time life event. It's a daily commitment, sometimes hourly, sometimes even a minute-by-minute affair. And that means we have endless opportunities for do-overs, infinite occasions for recommitment, countless circumstances for recognizing how our egos are blocking us from right relationships with each other, and quietly, gently, lovingly shifting ourselves into a better way, one that glorifies God and honors our neighbor. Egos are essential for a healthy sense of self-worth. But Jesus is reiterating the same theme found in all major religions, from Judaism through Christianity, in Hinduism and Buddhism, in Islam and Confucianism and Taoism, and even into modern-day scientific studies. The overcoming of self or ego is central to our flourishing in an abundance of life and love in the world, and in realizing higher truths that go far beyond our typical everyday experience. Transcending our ego offers us the freedom to serve others, embrace generosity as a way of life, and recognize that everyone is worthy of God's love. Letting go of our sense of self opens up the possibility of kingdom living. It's a high price to pay, but if the words of Jesus are to be believed, it's worth the cost. May we find the courage to let go of our ego, to transcend our sense of self, and in so doing, embrace the path that leads to God, our source of life and the ground of our being. Amen.